Get a real education. Professor Humiliates, single mom student. She had more degrees than him. But when the laughter died, a shocking truth left the entire class in stunned silence. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun filtered through the worn curtains of Marissa Carter's small kitchen, casting a warm glow on the scratched but clean countertops. She moved with practiced efficiency, spreading peanut butter on whole wheat bread while keeping one eye on the clock above the stove. The routine was familiar: making Lily's lunch, checking her backpack, ensuring everything was perfect for her daughter's day. But today felt different. Today, her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped the sandwich in wax paper. "Mom, you forgot the crusts," Lily said, peering over the counter with bright eyes. At 9, she was already so observant, so tuned to her mother's smallest habits. "Oh, right." Marissa quickly trimmed the edges, managing a smile despite the knot in her stomach. "Thank you for reminding me, sweetheart." Lily watched her mother carefully fold the brown paper bag. "Are you scared about your class tonight?" Marissa paused, considering how to answer. She'd always been honest with her daughter, but she also wanted to be strong for her. "A little nervous," she admitted, tucking a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. "It's been a while since I've been in school." "But you're so smart," Lily declared, her faith absolute and unwavering. She hopped off her chair and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. "You'll be the smartest one there. I just know it." Marissa bent down and kissed Lily's forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Thank you, my love." The morning passed in a blur of activity, dropping Lily at school, working her part-time job at the library, and then rushing home to change for her evening class. Standing before the mirror, Marissa smoothed her conservative navy blazer, chosen carefully to project professionalism. Her reflection showed a woman in her late 30s, with determined brown eyes and worry lines that had appeared too early around her mouth. The drive to campus felt surreal. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Marissa parked in the student lot, her used sedan looking out of place among the newer vehicles. Young students streamed past her, laughing and chatting, their backpacks slung carelessly over their shoulders. Most looked barely older than 20. Marissa clutched her notebook tighter and checked the campus map one more time, though she'd memorized the route to Building C, room 205. The hallways echoed with her footsteps as she located her classroom, arriving 15 minutes early. Professor Alan Whitaker was already there, writing on the whiteboard in precise strokes. He barely glanced her way as she chose a seat in the middle row, not too forward, not too far back. Other students filtered in, filling the room with a buzz of conversation and the rustle of papers. The professor turned to face the class exactly at 6:30 p.m. His steel gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an austere appearance, matched by his crisp, button-down shirt and perfectly pressed slacks. "Welcome to Advanced Educational Theory," he announced, his voice carrying authority. "I assume you've all done the preliminary reading?" Heads nodded around the room. Marissa had not only read the assigned chapters, but had taken detailed notes, determined to start strong. When Professor Whitaker began discussing learning frameworks, she recognized concepts she'd studied before, in another country, another life. "Can anyone explain the fundamental difference between behaviorist and constructivist approaches?" he asked, scanning the room. Marissa's hand rose slowly but steadily. The professor's eyes narrowed slightly as he nodded in her direction. "The behaviorist approach focuses on observable behaviors and sees learning as a response to external stimuli," she began, her accent more pronounced with nervousness. "While constructivism emphasizes how learners actively build their understanding through experience and reflection." "I'm sorry," Professor Whitaker interrupted, his tone dripping with disdain. "I can hardly understand what you're saying. Maybe if you got a real education instead of chasing sympathy, you'd understand the importance of clear communication in academia." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the snickers. Not from everyone, but enough to make Marissa's cheeks burn. She saw a few students exchange glances, some uncomfortable, others openly amused. Her throat tightened. The words she'd spoken, words she knew were correct, seemed to evaporate in the face of his contempt. Years of study, countless nights of research, all dismissed in a single cruel moment. She forced herself to sit straight, to keep her expression neutral, though her hands trembled beneath the desk. The rest of the class passed in a blur of humiliation. Professor Whitaker never called on her again, but she felt his dismissive glances, heard the edge in his voice when he spoke about maintaining academic standards. When class finally ended, Marissa gathered her belongings with deliberate movements, waiting until most students had left before standing. As she walked to her car, the campus had grown dark, security lights casting long shadows across the empty walkways. She drove to pick up Lily from the after-school program, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her daughter was already drowsy when she buckled her into the back seat. "How was your class, Mom?" Lily mumbled sleepily. "It was different than I expected," Marissa answered softly, watching in the rearview mirror as Lily's eyes drifted closed. Under the steady rhythm of streetlights, Marissa fought back tears. The professor's words echoed in her mind, but they were overshadowed by the sight of her sleeping daughter, so trusting, so certain of her mother's capabilities. "I have to keep going for her," Marissa whispered to herself, gripping the wheel tighter as they drove through the quiet streets toward home. The next morning's sunlight spilled across Marissa and Lily's small breakfast table, warming the worn wooden surface where 2 bowls of cereal. Saturday, Lily spooned her cornflakes slowly, her dark eyes fixed on her mother with that too wise expression that sometimes made Marissa's heart ache. "So?" Lily asked, swinging her legs under the table. "How was your class, Mom?" Marissa paused, her spoon hovering above her bowl. The memory of last night's humiliation burned fresh in her mind. The professor's sneering face, the ripple of laughter through the classroom, the hot flush of shame. But looking at her daughter's hopeful expression, she couldn't bear to share that pain. It was, Marissa chose her words carefully, offering a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was tough, but I'll keep trying," Lily beamed. "Of course you will. You're the smartest person I know." Marissa reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's small hand, drawing strength from that pure, unconditional faith. That evening, Marissa slipped into the same classroom, her shoulders tight with tension. She chose a seat near the back this time, hoping to avoid attention. Professor Whitaker stood at the front, writing on the whiteboard with sharp, aggressive strokes. A young woman with curly red hair and bright eyes dropped into the seat next to her. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm Jenny." Marissa nodded politely but kept her eyes forward, afraid to engage. The professor had started his lecture on advanced statistical analysis, and she found herself automatically noting several oversimplifications in his explanation. Her fingers itched to raise her hand, but yesterday's humiliation held her back. "Can anyone explain the practical applications of this method?" Professor Whitaker asked, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Marissa with a smirk. "Perhaps someone with real-world experience." The mockery in his tone was unmistakable. Marissa felt her cheeks warm, but something in her refused to back down again. She raised her hand. "Yes, Miss Carter?" His tone dripped with condescension. Marissa spoke carefully, her accent precise and measured. "The method you're describing is particularly useful in analyzing demographic trends, especially when accounting for multiple variables. I saw it applied effectively in a study of educational outcomes across different socioeconomic groups." The professor's eyebrows shot up, clearly surprised by her knowledgeable response. Next to her, Jenny was typing rapidly on her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Oh my God!" Jenny suddenly gasped, loud enough for nearby students to turn. Her eyes were wide as she stared at her phone screen. "You're Dr. Marissa Carter! You have a PhD in educational psychology from the University of Melbourne and a master's in statistical analysis from Oxford." The classroom fell silent. Professor Whitaker's face drained of color. "Wait, what?" someone whispered. Jenny, seemingly oblivious to the tension, continued excitedly. "There are papers published under your name in international journals. You developed a new methodology for analyzing learning patterns in underprivileged communities." She looked up at Marissa with awe. "Why didn't you say anything?" All eyes turned to Marissa, who sat very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched thick and heavy until someone in the back whispered, "Holy cow, she's more qualified than Whitaker." The professor cleared his throat sharply, his face now mottled red. "This is hardly relevant to today's lesson," he snapped, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. "Let's continue with the practical examples." But the damage was done. The atmosphere in the classroom had shifted dramatically. Students who had laughed at her yesterday now looked at her with a mixture of respect and embarrassment. Professor Whitaker stumbled through the rest of his lecture, his usual confidence shattered. When class ended, Marissa gathered her books slowly, pressing them against her chest like a shield. As she walked toward the door, she noticed the changes, subtle but significant. A young man nodded respectfully as she passed. Two women who had giggled at her accent yesterday smiled apologetically. The hallway felt different too, as if the air itself had changed. Jenny caught up with her, practically bouncing with excitement. "Dr. Carter, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I had no idea. We had no idea." Marissa managed a small, hopeful smile. It wasn't vindication she wanted. Just a chance to learn, to rebuild, to make a better life for Lily. But as she walked through the corridor, head held a little higher than before, she allowed herself to feel a tiny spark of optimism. Other students were looking at her differently now, with curiosity and respect rather than derision. The change was subtle but unmistakable, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. She hugged her books closer, that small smile still playing on her lips, and headed toward the parking lot where Lily waited with their elderly neighbor who watched her during evening classes. What mattered wasn't the degrees she held or the papers she'd published. What mattered was showing Lily that no matter how many times life knocked you down, you got back up. You kept trying. You kept learning. And sometimes, just sometimes, the truth had a way of coming to light all on its own. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds in the administrative building's hallway. Marissa smoothed her skirt one more time before entering Dean Russell's office, her heart thumping against her ribs. She'd left Lily sitting cross-legged on the worn wooden bench outside, armed with her favorite coloring book and a box of slightly broken crayons. "Come in, Mrs. Carter," Dean Russell called out, his voice carrying that carefully measured tone of someone who had delivered both good and bad news countless times before. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, surrounded by framed diplomas and certificates that seemed to watch her every move. Marissa settled into one of the stiff-backed chairs facing his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The leather squeaked beneath her as she tried to find a comfortable position. "I understand there's been quite a situation regarding your academic background," the dean began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He pulled out a manila folder and opened it with deliberate slowness. "We've verified your credentials from your previous institutions." A flutter of hope rose in Marissa's chest. "Yes, sir. I completed my degrees before coming to America." Dean Russell nodded, his expression neutral. "Your academic achievements are impressive, Mrs. Carter. 2 advanced degrees, excellent recommendations." He paused, and Marissa's hope began to waver at the word that hung unspoken in the air. However, he continued, confirming her fears, "I'm afraid these degrees, while noteworthy, don't meet our state's requirements for professional certification." He folded his hands on top of her file. "The educational systems are different, you see. The coursework and standards don't align with U.S. requirements." The room seemed to shrink around Marissa. Through the partially open door, she could hear the soft scratch of Lily's crayons against paper, the sound both comforting and painful. "But surely," she started, her accent thickening with emotion, "with my experience and—" "Mrs. Carter," Dean Russell interrupted gently, "this isn't about your capabilities. It's about meeting state-mandated requirements. We have to follow these guidelines, regardless of prior education or experience." Marissa's fingers twisted in her lap. "I understand," she said, though her heart screamed otherwise. "There's one more thing," the dean continued, pulling another paper from the folder. "Given the recent developments in Professor Whitaker's class, we've had to make some administrative decisions." He cleared his throat. "Professor Whitaker has been assigned as your faculty supervisor for the duration of the program." The blood drained from Marissa's face. "Professor Whitaker?" she echoed, barely recognizing her own voice. "But after what happened—" "He is the department's senior faculty member," Dean Russell stated firmly. "And despite recent, uncomfortable moments, he is highly qualified to oversee your progress." His tone softened slightly. "We expect professional behavior from all parties moving forward." Marissa sat very still, feeling the weight of every sacrifice she'd made to get here. The late nights studying while Lily slept, the careful budgeting of every penny, the dreams of finally building a stable life for her daughter. Now it felt like she was right back at the beginning, with an added obstacle in the form of a professor who'd already shown his disdain for her. "Do you have any questions, Mrs. Carter?" Dean Russell's voice cut through her thoughts. She wanted to ask so many things. How was this fair? How could they expect her to learn from someone who'd publicly humiliated her? How many more hurdles would she have to jump? Instead, she straightened her shoulders and said quietly, "No, sir. Thank you for your time." The dean nodded, already reaching for another stack of papers on his desk. "Good luck with your studies, Mrs. Carter." Marissa rose on slightly shaky legs and walked to the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she forced herself to move with dignity. Outside, Lily looked up from her coloring book, her face brightening at the sight of her mother. The purple crayon in her hand had left smudges on her fingers. Marissa knelt down beside the bench, coming eye level with her daughter. She forced her lips into a smile, though her heart felt like lead in her chest. "We'll be okay, honey," she said softly, reaching out to smooth Lily's hair. "Mommy's still going to class." The parking lot lights flickered in the deepening twilight, casting pools of yellow light across the nearly empty asphalt. Marissa sat in her old Honda, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to gather the strength to drive home. The day's meeting with the dean had left her feeling hollow inside. Her foreign degrees, years of dedicated study and sacrifice, and counted for nothing here. A gentle tap on her window made her jump. Through the glass, she saw a kind-faced older man in a gray maintenance uniform. His name tag read Darnell. Marissa quickly wiped her eyes and rolled down the window. "Everything all right, ma'am?" His voice carried a warmth that reminded her of her grandfather. "I'm fine," Marissa said automatically, though her voice cracked slightly. Just taking a moment before heading home." Mr. Darnell leaned against his cleaning cart, his eyes understanding. "Sometimes those moments are the most important ones we get." He pulled out a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it through the window. Tears aren't something to hide, especially when they come from fighting the good fight. Marissa accepted the handkerchief, touched by the simple gesture. "How did you know I was fighting?" "Been working here 20 years, he said, adjusting his cap. "I see everything from these halls, including how some folks treat others who they think don't belong." He shook his head. "Saw what happened in Professor Whitaker's class the other day. Wasn't right." "It doesn't matter," Marissa said quietly, dabbing her eyes. "I just need to get through this program." "It does matter," Mr. Darnell said firmly. "Every soul matters. Every dream matters." He straightened up, his shoulders square, the bearing of a military man. "You know, when I served, I faced plenty who thought I didn't belong in a leadership position. But I learned something important. Don't let someone else's ignorance shrink your light." His words settled deep in Marissa's chest, warming something that had grown cold. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm usually around these halls in the evenings," he said with a gentle smile. "If you ever need a friendly face or just someone to talk to." The next few days brought subtle changes. After class one evening, Jenny, the student who had discovered Marissa's credentials, approached her with a shy smile. "Hey," Jenny said, falling into step beside her. "I wanted to say I'm sorry if I caused any trouble by bringing up your degrees in class. I just couldn't stand how unfairly you were being treated." Marissa adjusted her book bag. "It's okay." The truth would have come out eventually. "Some of us study together at the library on Thursdays," Jenny continued. "You should join us. Marcus makes great study guides." Marcus, a quiet student who sat near the back, looked up from gathering his papers and nodded. "You'd be welcome," he said. "Besides, your insights on international education systems would really help with Professor Thompson's comparative analysis project." Warmth bloomed in Marissa's chest, the first real sense of belonging she'd felt since starting the program. "I'd like that," she said softly. Of course, Professor Whitaker hadn't changed. If anything, his jabs had become more subtle, more precise. When Marissa answered questions correctly, he'd say things like, "Well, I suppose some of us have had the luxury of multiple attempts at education." Or he'd make pointed remarks about real-world experience versus theoretical knowledge. But now, she wasn't alone in bearing it. Jenny would roll her eyes dramatically at his comments. Marcus would deliberately ask Marissa's opinion on complex topics, highlighting her expertise. Even some other students began nodding encouragingly when she spoke in class. During study sessions, Marissa found herself slowly opening up about her life, about earning her degrees while working full-time, about her husband leaving when Lily was barely walking, about starting over in a new country with nothing but hope and determination. "That's incredible," Jenny said one evening, looking up from her textbook. You did all that while raising Lily alone? Lily makes it worth every struggle, Marissa replied, thinking of her daughter's bright smile. Marcus closed his notebook thoughtfully. You know, Professor Whitaker's never published anything half as impressive as your research on educational equity. I looked it up. The evening air was cool as Marissa finally drove home, streetlights painting stripes across the dashboard. The weight of the dean's words still pressed on her shoulders, but it felt lighter somehow, shared with others who understood. She found Lily at their neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment, homework spread across the coffee table. Her daughter's face lit up as soon as she walked in. Mom! I finished my math problems all by myself. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Marissa said, gathering Lily's things and thanking Mrs. Chen for watching her. Back in their small apartment, they settled into their evening routine. Lily changed into her favorite cartoon pajamas while Marissa heated up leftover soup. They curled up together on their worn couch, Lily's head resting against her mother's shoulder. How was school today, Mom? Lily asked, playing with the fringe of their old throw blanket. It was better, Marissa answered honestly. I'm making some friends. Lily snuggled closer. I knew you would. You're the nicest person ever. She looked up at her mother with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed too knowing for her 9 years. And you're the bravest mom. Marissa pulled her daughter closer, breathing in the sweet smell of her strawberry shampoo. The day's bitterness melted away in the warmth of their embrace, replaced by something stronger, hope, love, and the quiet certainty that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The morning sun barely peeked through the kitchen window as Marissa stood at the counter, spreading peanut butter on wheat bread. Her class notes lay scattered beside the lunch supplies, and her eyes darted between them and the sandwich she was making. Dark circles traced beneath her eyes from another late-night study session. Mom, you forgot the jelly again, Lily said, pointing at the half-finished sandwich. She stood on her tiptoes, already dressed in her blue school uniform, her backpack neat and ready by the door. Oh, sorry, sweetie. Marissa blinked, reaching for the grape jelly. Her mind was still stuck on the complex economic theories she'd been reviewing since dawn. The words swam before her eyes. Supply curves, elasticity coefficients, market equilibrium. Did you sleep at all? Lily asked, her young face creasing with worry. She placed her small hand on her mother's arm. Marissa forced a smile. Of course I did. Just not as much as I should have. She finished the sandwich and tucked it into Lily's lunchbox, adding an apple and a small bag of carrots. Now, remember, Mrs. Johnson is picking you up after school today. I have that group presentation. The one with the mean professor? Lily's nose wrinkled. Professor Whitaker, Marissa corrected gently, though her stomach clenched at the name. And yes, that one. The morning routine continued in its familiar dance, checking homework, brushing teeth, combing hair. But today, Marissa's thoughts kept drifting to the upcoming presentation. Yesterday, Whitaker had assigned her the most challenging section of the group project, analyzing the impact of emerging market volatility on developing economies. Your international experience should make this fascinating, he'd said with that familiar smirk, knowing full well she'd have to research twice as hard as anyone else to meet his impossible standards. After dropping Lily at school, Marissa hurried to her morning job at the local coffee shop. Between customers, she snuck glances at her textbook hidden beneath the counter. During her lunch break, she huddled in the back room, munching on a day-old muffin while highlighting key passages. The afternoon class started like any other. Whitaker swept in, his leather briefcase swinging, his gray suit immaculate. Today's group presentations, he announced, scanning the room. His eyes lingered on Marissa. Let's start with Group C. Marissa's group shuffled to the front. Jenny, who had discovered Marissa's credentials that first week, gave her an encouraging smile. But Mark and Teresa, the other group members, barely acknowledged her presence. The emerging market section, Whitaker said. Miss Carter, why don't you begin? Marissa took a deep breath and stepped forward. She'd practiced this presentation countless times, whispering the words to herself while folding laundry, rehearsing in the shower, running through the points during her coffee shop shifts. The volatility in emerging markets presents unique challenges, she began, her accent careful but clear. She launched into her analysis, pointing out trends and correlations that had taken hours to research. A few minutes in, Teresa whispered something to Mark, both snickering. Whitaker's eyebrows rose at a particular point, his pen scratching rapid notes. Marissa kept going, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. When she finished, Whitaker leaned forward. "Interesting perspective, Miss Carter. Though perhaps a bit simplistic? I expected more nuance from someone with your supposed background." The word supposed hung in the air like poison. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jenny frowned. "I'd be happy to elaborate," Marissa replied, forcing her voice to stay level. She pulled up additional slides she'd prepared, knowing Whitaker might challenge her. For the next 5 minutes, she detailed complex economic patterns she'd studied until her eyes burned. Whitaker's face tightened, but he said nothing more. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes and work. By evening, Marissa picked up an exhausted Lily from Mrs. Johnson's house, treating her to a quick dinner of mac and cheese before tackling homework together at their small kitchen table. "You look tired, Mom," Lily said as Marissa helped her with multiplication tables. "Just busy, sweetheart." Marissa kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo. After tucking Lily into bed with a story and a hug, Marissa returned to the kitchen table. The clock read 9:30 p.m. She spread out her books and notes, pulled out her laptop, and began working on next week's assignments. Whitaker had already emailed the class their next topics. Hers, predictably, was the most complex. The hours ticked by. Dishes sat unwashed in the sink. A pile of laundry waited in the corner. But Marissa kept reading, highlighting, taking notes. Her coffee grew cold beside her, but she barely noticed. The kitchen clock clicked softly toward midnight. Marissa rubbed her burning eyes, then straightened her shoulders and picked up her pen again. The numbers and theories might swim on the page, but she refused to let Whitaker win. She refused to let Lily see her mother give up. Under the harsh kitchen light, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, Marissa's exhaustion was evident in every line of her face. But in her eyes, something stronger burned. A fierce determination that no amount of prejudice or pressure could extinguish. She had crossed oceans, rebuilt a life from nothing, and she would succeed here too, one late night at a time. Her pencil moved across the paper, steady and sure, as midnight approached. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the crowded classroom as Marissa Carter stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly against the wooden surface. Her presentation notes lay before her, though she'd memorized every word. In the back row, 9-year-old Lily sat cross-legged in an oversized chair, colored pencils spread across her desk as she sketched something in her notebook, occasionally glancing up at her mother with encouraging smiles. "Today," Marissa began, her accent more pronounced with nervousness, "I'd like to discuss educational equity across different cultures." She paused, taking a deep breath. Professor Whitaker sat in the corner, his arms crossed, wearing his usual expression of barely concealed disdain. The projector illuminated the screen behind her with graphs and statistics, but it was when Marissa began speaking from personal experience that the room grew still. "In my home country," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "I saw brilliant minds denied opportunities simply because of their background or gender. But I also witnessed how education could transform lives, one person at a time." Her hands steadied as she shared stories from her time teaching in rural communities, where students walked miles to attend class. She described the determination in their eyes, the same determination she now saw in her own reflection each morning. "Education isn't just about memorizing facts or earning degrees," Marissa said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It's about opening doors, creating understanding, and building bridges between different worlds." Jenny, sitting in the front row, nodded enthusiastically, while Marcus typed furiously on his laptop, capturing every word. Even the students who usually ignored her were paying attention now. "When we talk about educational equity," Marissa continued, pulling up a slide showing global literacy rates, "we're really talking about human dignity. Every person deserves the chance to learn, to grow, to contribute their unique perspective to the world." She shared an anecdote about a student she'd taught years ago, a young girl who'd become the first in her village to attend university. As she spoke, her voice carried the weight of experience and the lightness of hope. Professor Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual smirk replaced by an unreadable expression. "The challenges we face in education aren't just about resources," Marissa explained, her confidence growing with each word. They're about breaking down invisible barriers, prejudice, preconceptions, and the belief that some people are more deserving of knowledge than others. In the back of the room, Lily had stopped drawing, her eyes fixed on her mother, pride shining in her young face. The colored pencils lay forgotten on her desk. "I've experienced these barriers firsthand," Marissa admitted, her voice soft but clear. "But I've also seen them crumble when people choose to listen, to understand, to give others a chance." She glanced at her daughter, drawing strength from Lily's presence. "Every time we open our minds to different perspectives, we're taking a step toward true educational equity." As she concluded her presentation, there was a moment of complete silence. Then Jenny started clapping, followed quickly by Marcus. The applause spread through the room like a wave, growing stronger and more genuine than the polite acknowledgments usually given to student presentations. Lily's clapping echoed the loudest, her small hands creating an enthusiastic rhythm that made several students turn and smile. Her face beamed with such pure joy that a few of Marissa's classmates found themselves clapping harder. Professor Whitaker remained seated, his usual cutting remarks notably absent. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and merely nodded, the closest thing to approval he'd ever shown Marissa. As students packed up their belongings, several stopped to compliment her presentation. "That was amazing," Jenny said, touching Marissa's arm. "You really made us think differently about education," Marcus added. "The way you connected global perspectives with local issues? Brilliant." Lily bounced down from her back row seat, gathering her art supplies and rushing to her mother's side. "Mom, you were awesome," she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around Marissa's waist. "Everyone loved it." Later that evening, mother and daughter sat cross-legged on their living room floor, surrounded by the warm aroma of Chinese takeout. Empty containers of sweet and sour chicken and fried rice scattered across their small coffee table. Fortune cookies still wrapped in plastic, waiting to be opened. Lily picked up a cookie, cracking it open with excitement. "Mine says, 'Good things come to those who work hard,'" she read, giggling. "Just like you, Mom." Marissa smiled, reaching for her own fortune cookie. The events of the day felt surreal. The attentive faces, the genuine applause, even Professor Whitaker's silence. For once, her knowledge and experience had been truly seen and appreciated. As they gathered the empty containers and wiped down the coffee table together, Lily hummed a happy tune. Marissa watched her daughter, this bright spirit who had never stopped believing in her, even when she barely believed in herself. "Maybe things are changing," Marissa whispered as they finished cleaning up, more to herself than to Lily. But her daughter heard and squeezed her hand tight in response. The morning sun streamed through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. Marissa arrived 30 minutes early, as she always did, settling into her usual spot in the second row. The quiet before class had become her sanctuary, a moment to breathe, to prepare, to steady herself for whatever the day might bring. She pulled out her textbook, its pages now dotted with colorful sticky notes, when the door creaked open. Jenny Martinez bounced in, her curly hair wild as ever, followed by Marcus Lee with his characteristic calm demeanor. "There you are," Jenny's voice rang through the empty room. "We were hoping to catch you early." Marissa looked up, surprised. "Good morning," she said softly, her accent wrapping warmly around the words. Marcus pulled up a chair, his movements deliberate and careful. "We heard Professor Whitaker assigned the group project today," he said. "Jenny and I were wondering if you'd like to work with us." A warmth spread through Marissa's chest. But before she could respond, Professor Whitaker strode through the door. His shoes clicked sharply against the floor as he made his way to his desk, shooting them a disapproving look. "I see some students are already forming their little groups," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "How predictable." Jenny straightened in her chair. "Yes, Professor. We're asking Marissa to join us because she's one of the strongest students in class." Whitaker's frown deepened, but Jenny held his gaze until he turned away, shuffling papers on his desk with unnecessary force. "Thank you," Marissa whispered to her newfound allies. "I'd love to work with you both." As other students filtered in, they quickly made plans to meet at the library that afternoon. Marissa mentioned needing to bring Lily along, worried this might change their minds. But both Jenny and Marcus immediately brightened. "Your daughter, the artist?" Jenny grinned. "Perfect. She can help me with my stick figures." Later that day, sunlight poured through the library's tall windows, warming the wooden table where they had spread out their books and laptops. Lily sat cross-legged in a chair too big for her, tongue poking out as she concentrated on her math homework. So, if we approach the analysis from this angle, Marcus was saying, sketching out a diagram, we can incorporate both theoretical frameworks. Jenny nodded enthusiastically. And Marissa, your experience with international education systems would add exactly the perspective we need. Marissa felt her shoulders relax, something that happened less and less these days. Here, surrounded by open books and friendly faces, she could almost forget the weight of Whitaker's judgment, the struggle of being a single mother, the constant need to prove herself. Look, Mom! Lily's excited whisper cut through her thoughts. I finished all my multiplication tables. Marissa leaned over to check her daughter's work, aware of Jenny and Marcus watching with warm smiles. Perfect work, mi amor, she praised, her heart swelling as Lily beamed. She's like a mini you, Jenny observed, offering Lily a high five. Smart and determined. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with productive discussion and occasional laughter. Marcus broke down complex concepts with patient clarity, while Jenny's creative energy kept them motivated. They worked seamlessly together, each contributing their strengths to the project. We should meet again tomorrow, Marcus suggested as the library lights began to dim, signaling evening's approach. Same time? Marissa nodded gratefully, gathering Lily's scattered crayons while her daughter carefully packed her backpack. The simple routine of it all, studying, helping with homework, working with peers who respected her, felt almost too normal, too good to be true. They were walking toward the library's exit when footsteps echoed behind them. Professor Whitaker appeared from between the shelves, a stack of books under his arm. His eyes narrowed as they fell on their group, lingering particularly on Marissa. The air grew thick with tension. Lily instinctively moved closer to her mother, picking up on the sudden change in atmosphere. Jenny's normally cheerful expression hardened, while Marcus stood a little straighter. Whitaker's jaw clenched as he took in their unified front. His grip on his books tightened until his knuckles showed white, and without a word, he brushed past them, his shoulder nearly clipping Marissa's. The hostility in that silent exchange was unmistakable. As they watched him stalk away, Marissa could feel his resentment hanging in the air like a storm cloud, dark and threatening. She pulled Lily closer, grateful for the steady presence of her new friends beside her. Jenny shifted her bag on her shoulder, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Same time tomorrow, then? She asked, her voice deliberately bright. Same time, Marcus confirmed, giving Marissa a reassuring nod. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Marissa felt the familiar weight of Whitaker's disapproval settling back on her shoulders. But now, at least, she wasn't carrying it alone. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the empty hallway as Marissa gathered her books after class. Most students had already rushed out, eager to start their evening. She glanced at Lily, who sat quietly in the corner chair where she always waited, nose buried in her favorite chapter book. Mrs. Carter? The gentle voice made her turn. Mr. Darnell stood in the doorway, his worn maintenance uniform neat as always, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. I just finished brewing a fresh pot in the staff lounge. Care to join me? Marissa hesitated, clutching her books closer. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, he said, waving away her concern. And I believe I spotted some chocolate chip cookies in there, too. He winked at Lily, who perked up at the mention of cookies. Can we, Mom, please? Lily's eyes sparkled with hope. Marissa smiled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Well, I suppose a quick cup wouldn't hurt. They followed Mr. Darnell down the quiet hallway, their footsteps echoing against the linoleum floors. The staff lounge was small but cozy, with worn armchairs and the comforting aroma of coffee filling the air. True to his word, a plate of cookies sat on the counter. Help yourself, little lady, Mr. Darnell said to Lily, who carefully selected a cookie before settling into a chair with her book. He poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to Marissa's just the way she liked it. She'd mentioned it once in passing weeks ago, and he'd remembered. Sugar? No, thank you. Marissa wrapped her hands around the warm mug, feeling some of her daily tension begin to melt away. Mr. Darnell eased into the chair across from her, his movements deliberate and measured. You know, he began, his voice soft but clear. Watching you these past weeks has reminded me of my early days in the service. Marissa looked up, surprised. In all their brief conversations, he'd never mentioned his military background. Vietnam, he continued, nodding slowly. 1,969. I was one of only 3 black men in my unit. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. The others, well, they didn't make it home. Marissa sat quietly, sensing the weight of his words. Our commanding officer, Mr. Darnell, continued. He was cut from the same cloth as your Professor Whitaker. Looked at me like I was less than nothing. His eyes grew distant with memory. Gave me the worst assignments, the most dangerous posts. Tried to break me down any way he could. How did you handle it? Marissa asked softly, glancing briefly at Lily, who was contentedly munching her cookie, lost in her book. Mr. Darnell's face softened into a gentle smile. Same way you're handling it now. One day at a time, head held high. See, people like that, they expect you to crack, to prove them right. But every time you show up, every time you excel despite their efforts, it chips away at their prejudice, bit by bit. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on an earnest tone. I saw how those students reacted to your presentation last week. You're not just earning a degree, Mrs. Carter. You're changing minds, changing hearts. Marissa felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Sometimes it feels impossible, she whispered, like I'm fighting against a current that's too strong. I felt that way too. Mr. Darnell nodded. But you know what? That commanding officer, by the end of our tour, he was recommending me for commendations. Not because I fought back or made a scene, but because I kept standing tall, kept doing what was right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn silver compass. My father gave me this before I shipped out. Said as long as I knew my true north, I couldn't get lost. He turned it over in his weathered hands. Your true north is clear as day, Mrs. Carter. It's sitting right there with chocolate chips on her face. Lily looked up at that moment, quickly wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, making them both laugh. Keep standing tall, Mr. Darnell said, his voice firm but gentle. People may not see it now, but you're changing hearts. Every single day. The evening light was fading outside the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Marissa finished her coffee, feeling warmer inside than just the beverage could account for. Thank you, she said softly, standing up. For the coffee and everything else. Mr. Darnell nodded, understanding all she left unsaid. Any time, Mrs. Carter. Any time. As they walked to their car in the growing dusk, Lily's small hand wrapped in hers, Marissa felt lighter than she had in weeks. She helped Lily into her seat, buckling her in securely. Settling behind the wheel, she caught her daughter's eye in the rearview mirror. You know what, sweetheart? She whispered, starting the engine. There are angels in unlikely places. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Marissa scribbled on her to-do list, her coffee growing cold beside her. Lily sat at the table, carefully coloring her poster for the upcoming school recital while munching on cereal. Mom, can we get sparkly paper for my costume? Lily asked, looking up from her work with hopeful eyes. Marissa checked her worn wallet and counted the remaining bills. We'll see what we can find at the dollar store, sweetheart. Let me check the grocery list first. The local supermarket was quiet during mid-morning. Marissa pushed the cart down the aisles, calculating prices in her head. Store brand pasta instead of name brand. The cheaper bread. Skip the fresh berries Lily loved. They were too expensive this week. She'd make it up to her somehow. Remember to get your notebook for class, Lily reminded her as they passed the school supplies section. Marissa smiled at her daughter's thoughtfulness. Even at 9, Lily kept track of everything her mother needed. Back home, Marissa rushed to put away the groceries while helping Lily practice her lines for the recital. From the top, honey, she encouraged, sorting through a stack of assignments due that evening. The afternoon slipped away in a blur of domestic tasks and study sessions. Before she knew it, it was time for her evening class. They arrived early, and Lily settled into her usual spot in the back corner with her coloring books and homework. Professor Whitaker swept into the room, his presence immediately dampening the casual chatter among students. Marissa sat straighter in her chair, determined to stay focused despite his intimidating demeanor. 20 minutes into the lecture, Marissa raised her hand to answer a question about educational psychology theories. The socio-cultural perspective suggests that learning occurs through social interaction and cultural context, she explained, her slight accent more pronounced due to nervousness. Whitaker's lips curled into a familiar smirk. Ah, yes, Miss Carter. Perhaps you could repeat that in proper English this time? Some of us are having trouble understanding your unique pronunciation." Two students near the front snickered. Marissa felt heat rise to her cheeks, her throat tightening. Jenny, sitting beside her, spoke up sharply. "Professor?" Marissa's answer was perfectly clear and correct. Marcus nodded from the other side. "Yeah, I don't see how anyone could misunderstand that. But the damage was done." Marissa's hands trembled slightly as she wrote notes, the words blurring before her eyes. She could feel Lily's concerned gaze from the back of the room. Whitaker continued his lecture as if nothing had happened, but his pointed glances in her direction carried clear messages of disdain. Each time he called on other students, deliberately skipping over her raised hand, the knot in her stomach grew tighter. When class finally ended, Marissa gathered her things quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Jenny touched her arm gently. "Don't let him get to you. He's just threatened because you know more than he does." Marissa managed a weak smile. "Thank you, but I should get Lily home." The drive home was quiet. Lily hummed softly to herself in the back seat, while Marissa fought back tears, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. At home, Marissa busied herself with dinner preparations, her movements mechanical. Lily watched her mother from the kitchen table, her young face creased with worry. "Mom, are you okay?" "Of course, sweetie. Just tired." Marissa's voice wavered slightly. "Why don't you get ready for bed? I'll be there in a minute to tuck you in." Once Lily disappeared down the hallway, Marissa slipped into the bathroom. She turned on the faucet, letting the water run to mask the sound of her quiet sobs. Years of education, countless hours of hard work, and still she was treated like she was nothing. The walls she'd built around her heart were cracking. She didn't hear the soft padding of feet outside the door. Didn't know Lily stood there listening to her muffled cries. The little girl's heart ached for her mother, understanding more than any child should have to. Later that night, as Marissa lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her door creaked open. Small footsteps approached, and then Lily was climbing in beside her, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. Marissa quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a smile as she stroked her daughter's hair. But the tears lingered, refusing to be dismissed so easily. "You're the smartest person I know, Mommy," Lily whispered into the darkness. Marissa pulled her daughter closer, feeling the unconditional love radiating from her small body. Her throat tight with emotion, she continued stroking Lily's hair, unable to find words to respond. The tears in her eyes caught the dim light from the window, silent witnesses to both her pain and her determination to keep going, if only for the precious child in her arms. The university auditorium hummed with nervous energy as students filed in for the seminar presentations. Marissa Carter sat in the third row, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed her note cards one final time. The leather seats creaked around her as people settled in, their whispered conversations creating a soft blanket of sound that filled the space. Her daughter, Lily, had insisted on wearing her fancy polka dot dress for the occasion, and now sat proudly in the back row next to Mr. Darnell, who had taken his lunch break to attend. Ginny and Marcus flanked Marissa, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You've got this," Jenny whispered, squeezing her arm. "Your research is amazing." Dean Russell sat in the front row, his posture formal as always, while Professor Whitaker lounged in his chair at the end of the row, idly checking his phone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the projector hummed as it displayed the day's schedule. When Professor Whitaker called her name, Marissa's heart jumped. She stood slowly, smoothing her carefully chosen navy blazer, and walked to the podium. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step echoing in her ears. As she arranged her materials, she caught sight of Lily giving her a thumbs up from the back row. Taking a deep breath, Marissa began. "Education isn't just about degrees on a wall," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's about transformation, about hope." She shared stories from her research, of refugee children learning to read in makeshift classrooms, of elderly women earning their first diplomas, of communities lifted by knowledge shared across generations. Her accent, usually a source of self-consciousness, now carried the weight of authenticity as she spoke of her first-hand experiences in different countries. "In Thailand," she continued, clicking to a new slide, "I met a grandmother who walked 2 hours each way to attend literacy classes. When I asked her why, she said, 'Because now I can read bedtime stories to my grandchildren.'" Marissa's voice softened. That's the real power of education. It connects us. It heals us. It gives us dignity. The room had grown completely still. Even Professor Whitaker had put down his phone, his expression unreadable. Dean Russell leaned forward in his seat, his usual stern expression softened by interest. Marissa's research data backed up her personal observations, statistics showing improved community health outcomes, economic growth, and social mobility in areas with accessible education programs. But it was her stories that held the audience captive, painting pictures of determination and triumph that transcended borders and cultures. We often think of education as something that happens within these walls. She gestured to the auditorium around them. But true learning knows no boundaries. It happens in village squares, in community centers, in homes where parents help their children dream bigger than they themselves were allowed to dream. Her voice caught slightly as she glanced at Lily, who was beaming with pride. Every day, I see this truth through my daughter's eyes. She teaches me that learning is not about proving our worth to others, but about discovering the worth that was always within us. As Marissa concluded her presentation, the silence in the room held for a moment before erupting into applause. Students rose to their feet, their faces bright with emotion. Jenny wiped tears from her cheeks while clapping. Marcus whistled appreciatively. Dean Russell stood as well, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief before joining the applause. Even some of the students who had previously ignored or mocked her were standing, their faces showing newfound respect. Lily bounced in her seat, clapping so hard her polka dot dress swayed. Mr. Darnell's weathered face broke into a wide smile as he applauded, nodding at Marissa with obvious pride. When the applause finally died down, several students approached with questions, engaging in a thoughtful discussion that ran over the allotted time. Professor Whitaker had to clear his throat twice before he could regain control of the seminar. Later that evening, Marissa sat at their small kitchen table, still riding the high of her success. The smell of celebration pizza lingered in the air, a special treat for their dinner. Lily had been unusually quiet during the meal, occasionally glancing at her backpack with poorly concealed excitement. "Mom," Lily finally said, unable to contain herself any longer. "Close your eyes." Marissa obliged, hearing the rustle of paper and Lily's eager footsteps. "Okay, open them." In front of her lay a hand-drawn card, decorated with glitter and heart stickers. The words, "Best Professor Mom," were written in careful rainbow letters, and below was a drawing of two figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of what appeared to be a school building. "See?" Lily pointed to the drawing. "That's you teaching, and that's me watching, just like today. And look, I drew all your students clapping, just like they really did." Marissa's vision blurred as she traced the childish artwork with her finger. The pure love and pride in her daughter's creation overwhelmed her. This small moment, this simple card, somehow meant more than all the applause from earlier. With tears of joy streaming down her face, Marissa pulled her daughter into a tight hug. Then, carefully, she opened her notebook and tucked the precious card between its pages, right next to her presentation notes. "Perfect," she whispered, her heart full. "Right where it belongs." The morning sun cast long shadows across the university hallway as Marissa hurried toward the dean's office, her heart pounding against her ribs. Lily's small hand felt warm in hers, their footsteps echoing against the polished floor. The urgent summons had come just as she was dropping Lily off at school, forcing her to bring her daughter along. "Mom, why are you squeezing so hard?" Lily asked, looking up with concerned brown eyes. Marissa loosened her grip. "I'm sorry, sweetie." She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. The dean's secretary had sounded unusually stern on the phone, and now Professor Whitaker's car sat prominently in the parking lot. Something was terribly wrong. They reached the heavy wooden door with Dean Russell etched in gold letters. Marissa's hand shook as she knocked. "Come in," called the dean's voice, unusually formal. Inside, Dean Russell sat behind his massive desk, his face grave. Professor Whitaker stood by the window, arms crossed, a hint of satisfaction playing at the corners of his mouth. The sight made Marissa's stomach clench. "Please sit down, Mrs. Carter." Dean Russell gestured to a chair. "Perhaps your daughter could wait outside." "No." Lily clung tighter to Marissa's hand. "I want to stay with Mom." The dean sighed but nodded. Marissa sank into the chair, pulling Lily close beside her. The room felt suffocating, despite its high ceiling and large windows. "Mrs. Carter," Dean Russell began, shuffling some papers on his desk. "We've received a very serious accusation regarding your recent seminar presentation and paper." Marissa's throat went dry. "What kind of accusation?" Professor Whitaker stepped forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "I've discovered substantial evidence that your work was plagiarized." Multiple passages appear to be lifted directly from various academic sources. The words hit Marissa like a physical blow. "That's impossible," she gasped. "I wrote every word myself. I can show you my research notes, my drafts." "We have copies here," Whitaker interrupted, dropping a stack of papers on the dean's desk. "The similarities are unmistakable." Dean Russell picked up the papers, his expression troubled. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Carter. The evidence Professor Whitaker has presented Island. Concerning." Marissa's mind raced. She'd spent countless nights working on that paper, carefully citing every source, double-checking every reference. "Please," she said, her voice trembling, "let me explain. I can prove my work is original." "Mom?" Lily whispered, squeezing her hand tighter. The dean held up his hand. "Unfortunately, given the severity of these accusations, I have no choice but to suspend you pending a formal review." "Suspended?" The word echoed in Marissa's ears like a gunshot. "But my classes, my deadlines, will all be frozen until this matter is resolved," Dean Russell stated firmly. "You'll need to leave campus immediately and await further notice." Tears burned behind Marissa's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of Whitaker's smirking face. How long will the review take?" "These investigations typically require several weeks," Whitaker answered smoothly. "We must be thorough, you understand." A commotion outside the office drew their attention. Through the door's window, Marissa could see several of her classmates gathering, including Jenny and Marcus. Word had spread fast. As she stood on shaky legs, Lily still clutching her hand, the dean's voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Carter, I hope you understand this is standard procedure. We'll be in touch soon." Marissa nodded numbly, unable to speak. She guided Lily toward the door, her legs feeling like lead. As they stepped into the hallway, the gathered students fell silent. Some looked away. Others stared with a mixture of shock and disappointment. "I can't believe it," someone whispered. "She seemed so genuine." "Just another fraud," came another voice, barely audible but cutting like a knife. Lily's hands suddenly went slack in Marissa's grip. Her daughter's face crumpled as the cruel word registered. "Mom," she whimpered, tears spilling down her cheeks. The sight of Lily crying broke something inside Marissa. She scooped up her daughter and hurried through the corridor, past the whispers and stares, past Mr. Darnell, who reached out to her with concern, past the familiar classrooms where she'd started to feel at home. The drive home passed in a blur. Lily's quiet sniffles from the back seat were the only sound breaking the heavy silence. The morning sun now felt harsh and accusing, highlighting every tear track on both their faces. Inside their small apartment, Marissa moved on autopilot, hanging up their coats, setting down her bag. The best Professor Mom drawing fluttered out of her notebook, landing face up on the coffee table. She picked it up with trembling hands, running her fingers over Lily's careful crayon strokes. The weight of everything suddenly crashed down on her. All her hard work, her dreams, her daughter's pride in her, all destroyed by a lie. She sank onto the couch, still holding the drawing. Lily crawled up beside her, her small face streaked with dried tears.
"Mom, are you really what they said?"
"No, baby," Marissa whispered, pulling her daughter close. "But sometimes even telling the truth isn't enough." She stared at the ceiling, feeling the walls of her carefully built new life crumbling around her. The thought of fighting back felt overwhelming. How could she prove her innocence against a respected professor? How could she endure more weeks or months of whispers and accusations? Her voice came out barely audible as she clutched Lily's drawing to her chest. "Maybe I should quit." Steam rose from the untouched coffee mug in front of Marissa Carter, swirling in the early morning light that filtered through the kitchen window. Her hands rested limply on the worn wooden table, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The gentle ticking of the wall clock seemed to echo her scattered thoughts. Lily stood in her pajamas at the kitchen doorway, her stuffed bunny clutched tight against her chest. Her small face carried a worry no 9-year-old should know. "Mom?" she whispered, then louder. "Mom, are you still my hero?" The words hit Marissa like a physical blow. She looked up, meeting her daughter's uncertain gaze, and felt her heart crack. The label of fraud had done more than threaten her academic future. It had shaken her daughter's faith in her. "Come here, sweetheart," Marissa managed, opening her arms. Lily hurried over, climbing onto her lap like she used to when she was younger. The familiar weight of her daughter brought both comfort and pain. "I've always tried to teach you about honesty, haven't I?" Lily nodded against her shoulder. "That's why I don't understand. You always check my homework twice. You never even let me copy Angela's math answers that one time." A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Marissa wasn't expecting anyone, and her stomach clenched with anxiety. But when she opened the door, Mr. Darnell's familiar, kind face greeted her. He stood there in his casual clothes instead of his usual janitor's uniform, holding a paper bag. "Brought you some fresh bagels," he said simply. "Figured you might need breakfast. Mr. D." Lily brightened slightly, taking the bag from him. Marissa felt tears threatening. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He stepped inside, his presence filling their small kitchen with steady calm. "Because that's what friends do when someone's fighting a battle." While Lily arranged the bagels on a plate, Mr. Darnell sat at the table, his weathered hands wrapped around the coffee mug Marissa offered him. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "That man's accusations are nonsense." Marissa sank into her chair. "But how do I prove it? Professor Whitaker has the dean convinced. My whole future, everything I've worked for." Her voice cracked. "The truth has a way of rising," Mr. Darnell said firmly, leaning forward. "Like cream in coffee. But it needs someone strong enough to stir things up." He paused, watching Lily spread cream cheese on a bagel. "You've got to fight, Marissa. Not just for yourself." Marissa followed his gaze to her daughter and felt something shift inside her. The morning light caught the tears on her cheeks as she wiped them away. "You're right," she whispered, then stronger. "You're right." She stood up suddenly, pushing back her chair. "Lily, honey, can you help me get my study materials from the bedroom?" Together, they gathered her notebooks, laptop, and all her research materials, spreading them across the kitchen table. Mr. Darnell helped them organize everything into neat piles. "See these notes?" Marissa showed Lily her handwritten research journal. "Every idea, every source, every quote, I wrote them all down. That's how careful Mommy Island. Like when you make me show my work in math?" Lily asked, touching the pages filled with her mother's neat handwriting. "Exactly like that." Marissa managed a real smile this time. Mr. Darnell nodded approvingly. "Documentation is everything. In the service, we learned that the right papers can save your life." They spent the next hour going through her materials. Mr. Darnell shared stories about his own battles against prejudice in the military, how he learned to fight with dignity instead of anger. Lily helped by sorting papers and asking questions that sometimes led to useful realizations. "Remember," Mr. Darnell said as he prepared to leave, "you've got people in your corner. Don't let anyone dim your light." After he left, Marissa worked with renewed purpose. She created detailed timelines of her research process, gathered electronic timestamps from her draft submissions, and organized her source materials. As evening fell, she ordered pizza for Lily and kept working. "Mom?" Lily called from the couch where she was watching TV. "Are you going to be okay?" Marissa looked up from her work, seeing the worry still lingering in her daughter's eyes. "Come here, baby." When Lily came over, Marissa pulled her close. "Remember when you were learning to ride your bike and you kept falling?" Lily nodded. "But you didn't give up, did you? Because you knew the truth, that you could do it." Marissa kissed her daughter's forehead. "Well, Mommy knows her truth too, and I'm not giving up." As night settled in, Lily fell asleep on the couch, her favorite blanket tucked around her. Marissa worked at the kitchen table, the lamp casting a warm glow over her papers. Her coffee had gone cold again, but she barely noticed. She organized her evidence meticulously, whispering prayers under her breath as she worked. "Please, let the truth be enough. Let them see." Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed, but her resolve remained steady. The wall clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. Still, Marissa worked, driven by determination and her daughter's question from that morning. "Mom, are you still my hero?" In the quiet darkness, with Lily's soft breathing as her soundtrack, She prepared to fight for her truth, her dignity, and her daughter's faith in her. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she kept going, spreading her evidence across the table like a general planning a battle. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be clear. Outside, the moon cast shadows through the kitchen window, and still she worked, her whispered prayers mixing with the sound of shuffling papers and keyboard clicks. Morning sunlight spilled through the bedroom window as Marissa Carter stood before her closet, fingertips trailing over her limited selection of professional wear. Her hand paused on a simple navy blazer, the one she'd worn to her graduation years ago, before everything changed. "The blue one, Mommy," Lily said from her perch on the bed, still in her butterfly pajamas. "It makes you look strong." Marissa managed a small smile. "You think so?" "Definitely." Lily hopped off the bed and padded to her mother's side. She reached into the closet and pulled out a light cream scarf with tiny flowers. "And this one. It's pretty, like you." Marissa's throat tightened as she took the scarf from her daughter's small hands. Such a simple thing, this piece of fabric. But Lily's earnest desire to help meant everything. She draped it around her neck, the soft material somehow feeling like armor. In the bathroom mirror, Marissa carefully applied a touch of makeup, just enough to hide the dark circles under her eyes from nights of preparation. Her hands trembled slightly as she brushed her hair back into a neat bun. Everything had to be perfect today. "You look beautiful," Lily declared, watching from the doorway. Marissa turned and knelt before her daughter, straightening the girl's pajama collar. "Thank you, mi amor." She pulled Lily into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "Mommy promises to be strong today." "I know you will," Lily whispered into her neck. "You're always strong." After getting Lily dressed for school, Marissa spread her materials across the kitchen table. Her timeline lay before her like a map of her academic journey. Lecture notes, research citations, early drafts covered in her distinctive handwriting. She documented everything meticulously, knowing someday she might need proof of her work. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door arrived to take Lily to school, as she had offered to do during the hearing. The elderly woman gave Marissa's arm a gentle squeeze. "Con Dios," she murmured. As Marissa reviewed her defense one last time, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Jenny and Marcus standing there, holding coffee cups and paper bags. "We brought breakfast," Jenny announced, striding in with her usual directness. "Can't face the firing squad on an empty stomach." "It's not a firing squad," Marcus corrected gently, setting the food down. "It's a chance to show the truth." Marissa felt tears threatening. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, we did," Jenny insisted, unpacking bagels. "We're your friends, and we know you didn't plagiarize anything." Marcus nodded, his quiet presence reassuring. "We've studied with you for months. We've seen how you work, how you think. Professor Whitaker's wrong about you." They sat together at the table, going over her defense. Jenny pointed out particularly strong examples of Marissa's original work, while Marcus suggested ways to present the evidence clearly and calmly. "Remember," Jenny said, gripping Marissa's hand, "you've got nothing to be ashamed of. You earned every bit of knowledge you have. And you've inspired a lot of us," Marcus added. "The way you handle everything, school, being a mom, dealing with certain people's attitudes, we've got your back." When they left, Marissa felt steadier. She continued organizing her materials, placing everything in a neat folder. Her eyes fell on Lily's best Professor Mom drawing, tucked carefully inside the front pocket. Such faith her daughter had in her. She couldn't let that faith be destroyed. The afternoon stretched on, shadows lengthening across her kitchen floor. She rehearsed her defense again and again, determined to stay calm and professional no matter what accusations flew her way. Her foreign degrees might not count here, but her dignity and truth would stand. As evening approached, Marissa stepped onto her small balcony. The sky had turned a deep purple, stars just beginning to appear. A cool breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing down. "Lord," she whispered into the gathering night, her words carried away on the wind. "Walk with me tomorrow." The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to her prayer. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a good-night text from Lily. "Love you, Mom. You're still my hero." The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the dean's chamber, casting long shadows across the polished oak table. 7 faces stared back at Marissa from the review board. 3 professors, 2 department heads, Dean Russell and Professor Whitaker, who sat with an air of smug confidence. Marissa's hands trembled slightly as she arranged her documents. The room felt too warm, too small, despite its grand size. Her folder contained weeks of research notes, draft versions, and source citations, all meticulously organized the night before. "Mrs. Carter," Dean Russell began formally, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "you understand why we're here. Professor Whitaker has brought serious allegations of academic dishonesty against you." "Yes, sir." Marissa's voice came out steadier than she expected. She thought of Lily's brave face this morning, helping her choose her lucky blue scarf. "I'm prepared to address these claims." Whitaker leaned forward, his leather chair creaking. "The similarity between her paper and published works is unmistakable," he declared. "The writing style alone." "Professor," Dean Russell held up his hand. "Let's allow Mrs. Carter to present her defense first." Marissa opened her folder, spreading out her materials with careful precision. "I'd like to start by showing you my research journey," she began. She pulled out her earliest notes, scribbled on coffee-stained napkins during her breaks at work. "These are my initial concepts, dated 6 weeks ago." She passed copies to each board member. "You'll see how the ideas evolved through multiple drafts." Her finger traced the progression of her thought process, documented in her neat handwriting. "Here are my library checkout records for every source I consulted." One of the department heads, Dr. Thompson, studied the papers with interest. "These are quite detailed notes." "Yes," Marissa smiled softly. "When you're a single mother studying late at night, you learn to be organized." She pulled out more documents, printouts of academic articles with her highlighting and margin notes, rough drafts with crossed-out paragraphs and arrows redirecting thoughts. "What strikes me," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "is how education transforms lives across borders. My research explores this through various cultural lenses." She shared photocopies of her previous degrees, the ones that didn't count here. "My experience studying in different countries gave me unique insights into how knowledge bridges divides." Whitaker's smirk faltered slightly as she spoke. His fingers drummed impatiently on the table. "The accusation suggests I copied from existing works," Marissa addressed directly. "But what I did was build upon them, citing everything properly." She distributed her bibliography, each source carefully annotated. Every idea borrowed is credited. Every quote is marked. The second department head, Dr. Rivera, nodded slowly. "Your citation work is thorough." Marissa took a deep breath, feeling strength flow into her words. "But beyond the technical defense, I want to speak about what education truly means." She stood straighter, her voice clear and passionate. "Education isn't about power or prestige. It's not about using knowledge to diminish others." The room grew still. Even Whitaker stopped his finger drumming. "Education," Marissa continued, her accent carrying the weight of her conviction, "is about lifting people up. It's about opening doors, not closing them. Building bridges, not walls." She thought of Mr. Darnell's kind words, of Jenny and Marcus's friendship, of Lily's unwavering faith in her. "When I came to this country, I left behind degrees and achievements. But what I couldn't leave behind was my love of learning." Her voice softened. "Every night, my daughter watches me study. She sees me face challenges. Keep going when things get hard. That's the real education I'm passing on." Dean Russell leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Carter, can you explain the specific passage Professor Whitaker highlighted as suspicious?" "Of course." Marissa pulled out her research notes. "This section about educational equity drew from multiple sources, all cited here." She pointed to her citations. "But the analysis is original, shaped by my experiences teaching in 3 different countries." She walked them through her thinking process, showing how she developed her arguments. Her hands no longer shook as she explained each point, her passion for the subject shining through. The board members exchanged glances. Dr. Thompson studied Whitaker with a sharp eye.
"Professor, these notes and drafts seem to clearly demonstrate original work."
Whitaker shifted in his chair, his earlier confidence cracking. "The similarity in language is supported by proper citation," Dr. Rivera interrupted, tapping Marissa's bibliography. "And the development of ideas is clearly documented through multiple drafts." Marissa stood quietly, her heart pounding but her spirit calm. She thought of all the nights studying at the kitchen table, Lily sleeping nearby, of Mr. Darnell's encouragement, of every student who had started to see her as more than just the awkward single mom with an accent. "The board will need time to deliberate," Dean Russell announced, gathering his papers. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for your thorough presentation." Whitaker's chair scraped back as he stood, his face tight, with barely contained anger. The tension in the room felt like a stretched rubber band, ready to snap. The board members began discussing in low voices. Marissa waited, her hands clasped tightly together, watching Whitaker shift uneasily in his chair. The morning sun had climbed higher, its light now falling directly across the table where her evidence lay, her journey spelled out in paper and ink, in determination and truth. The grandfather clock in the corner of the dean's chamber struck 12, its deep chimes echoing through the tense silence. Marissa sat quietly in the waiting area, her fingers intertwined in her lap, while the board members filed back into the room after their morning deliberation. Mr. Darnell stood nearby, his presence steady and reassuring, while Jenny and Marcus waited with Lily in the hallway. Dean Russell cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Before we announce our decision, new evidence has come to light that requires immediate attention." He nodded to Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of the ethics committee, who opened a manila folder. Professor Whitaker shifted in his chair, his earlier confidence wavering. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. "We have obtained copies of emails, Doctor," Chen began, her voice clear and measured. "Sent from Professor Whitaker's university account over the past 3 months." She lifted a stack of papers. "These communications show a deliberate pattern of attempts to discredit and obstruct Mrs. Carter's academic progress." Gasps rippled through the room. Marissa's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dr. Chen continued, reading from one email. "We need to find a way to remove her from the program. Her presence undermines our academic standards." Another email states, "I've documented several instances of possible plagiarism. We'll use these if necessary." Professor Whitaker's face had turned ashen. "Those emails were private communications. You had no right." "They were sent through university servers," Dean Russell cut in, his voice sharp. "And they reveal a disturbing abuse of power." The room fell silent as Dr. Chen laid out more evidence. Screenshots of altered assignment grades, documented instances of discrimination, and testimonies from other students about Whitaker's targeted harassment. Furthermore, Dean Russell added, removing his glasses, "We've reviewed Mrs. Carter's complete research paper, including all preliminary drafts, source citations, and research notes. They demonstrate not only original work, but scholarly excellence." Marissa felt tears welling up but blinked them back. Years of dignity maintained through hardship had taught her to hold her head high. Professor Whitaker stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd! You're all being fooled by her act!" "Sit down, Professor Whitaker," Dean Russell commanded. "The board has reached several decisions." He turned to address the room at large. "First, Professor Alan Whitaker is immediately placed under investigation for ethical violations and misconduct. He will be suspended from all teaching duties pending a full review." Whitaker slumped in his chair, the fight draining from his face. "Second," Dean Russell continued, turning to Marissa with a gentler expression, "Mrs. Marissa Carter is hereby cleared of all plagiarism accusations. The board finds these charges were falsely made with malicious intent." Marissa pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the vindication she'd prayed for. "Furthermore," Dean Russell added, "we wish to extend our sincere apologies for the hardship you've endured. Your academic work has consistently demonstrated exceptional quality, and your conduct throughout this ordeal has been exemplary." Dr. Chen stood up. "In recognition of your unique international experience and academic achievements, we would like to offer you a position as a guest lecturer for our new Global Education Perspective seminar next semester." The tears Marissa had been holding back finally spilled over. Mr. Darnell squeezed her shoulder gently. "Mrs. Carter," Dean Russell concluded, "you represent the very best of what education should be: perseverance, integrity, and the pursuit of knowledge in service of others. You are not just reinstated, you are welcomed as a valued member of our academic community." As the meeting adjourned, Professor Whitaker shuffled out, shoulders hunched, avoiding everyone's eyes. Several board members approached Marissa with warm handshakes and words of encouragement. Mr. Darnell helped her gather her papers, his eyes twinkling. Didn't I tell you the truth would rise? Marissa could only nod, too moved for words. As she stepped into the hallway, a small figure came running full speed toward her.
Mommy! Mommy!
Lily crashed into her legs, almost knocking her over.
I knew you'd win, Mommy!
Marissa lifted her daughter into her arms, holding her tight as tears streamed down her face. Jenny and Marcus approached, both beaming, but gave mother and daughter space for their moment. Lily wiped at Marissa's tears with her small hands. Why are you crying if you won? Sometimes, Marissa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We cry because our hearts are too full of happiness. She held her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling the weight of accusations and doubt finally lifting from her shoulders. In this moment, with Lily in her arms and truth prevailing, she felt the full meaning of what she'd been fighting for, not just a degree or recognition, but the chance to show her daughter that justice and perseverance could overcome even the darkest doubts. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees lining the university walkway as Marissa climbed the familiar steps to her evening class. Everything looked the same: the weathered brick buildings, the scattered leaves dancing across the courtyard, the warm glow from classroom windows. And yet everything felt different. Students nodded and smiled as she passed, some stopping to chat briefly. Gone were the whispers and sideways glances that had haunted her first weeks here. In their place was something she hadn't expected: respect. Miss Carter. Jenny jogged up beside her, clutching her textbooks. We saved you a seat up front. Marissa's heart warmed at the genuine friendship in Jenny's voice. Thank you, she said, adjusting her own stack of books. How's the group project coming along? Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. We were hoping you could look over our outline. Your international perspective would really help. They entered the classroom together, where Marcus waved from their usual spot, the chair at the front of the room where Professor Whitaker had once loomed with his cruel smirks, now held a kind-faced visiting professor. The change felt like fresh air after a long storm. During class discussion, Marissa shared insights from her experiences abroad. Her voice was clear and confident now, her accent no longer a source of shame but a badge of her journey. Other students leaned in, taking notes, asking questions. She caught Mr. Darnell watching proudly from the hallway as he pushed his cleaning cart past the door. After class, as Marissa gathered her things, Dean Russell appeared in the doorway. Miss Carter, do you have a moment? She followed him to his office, noticing how different it felt from that first devastating meeting. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, warming the wood-paneled walls. Please, sit down, he said, his formal manner softened by what looked like genuine respect. First, I want to apologize again for how things were handled before. The university should have been more thorough in investigating Professor Whitaker's accusations. Marissa nodded, her hands folded quietly in her lap. We all learned from that experience, I think. Indeed. The dean shuffled some papers on his desk, then looked up at her directly. Which brings me to why I asked to speak with you. The university is introducing a new seminar series next semester on resilience and global education. Given your unique background and recent experiences. He paused, studying her reaction. We'd like you to co-lecture. Marissa's breath caught in her throat. Co-lecture? But I'm still a student. A student with 2 advanced degrees and valuable, real-world perspective. He smiled slightly. Sometimes the best teachers are those who remember what it's like to be on both sides of the desk. Her mind raced with possibilities, with doubts, with hope. I'm honored, but you don't need to decide immediately, the dean added. Think it over. Discuss it with your daughter, Lily. Marissa's heart swelled thinking how proud her little girl would be. Thank you, she said softly. I would love to accept. The dean's face brightened. Excellent. We'll set up a meeting next week to discuss details. He stood, extending his hand. Welcome to the faculty, Miss Carter. Walking to her car in the twilight, Marissa felt lighter than she had in months. The parking lot where she'd once cried in her car, where Mr. Darnell had first offered his kindness, now seemed to glow with possibility. She picked up Lily from the after-school program, her daughter's face lighting up as always. Mommy, you look happy. I am happy, sweet girl. Marissa hugged her tight. How about we make something special for dinner tonight? At home, their small kitchen filled with warmth and delicious smells as they worked together. Lily stirred the pasta, while Marissa chopped vegetables for their favorite sauce. Their little tradition of cooking together had seen them through the hardest days. Now, it would mark this moment of triumph. "Can I tell you some exciting news?" Marissa asked as she added herbs to the sauce. Lily nodded eagerly, perched on her step stool by the stove. "The university asked me to be a teacher. Not just a student anymore, but someone who helps other students learn." "Really?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Like a real professor?" "A co-lecturer," Marissa corrected gently, but couldn't help smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. "It means I'll teach some special classes about education around the world, and about never giving up when things get hard." "You're perfect for that, Mommy." Lily wrapped her arms around Marissa's waist. "You never gave up, even when that mean professor was so awful to you." Marissa stroked her daughter's hair, remembering those dark days that now felt like a distant storm. "We never gave up," she corrected. "You were my strength through all of it." They set their little table with their best plates, the ones they saved for special occasions. Lily insisted on lighting the candle in the center, carefully striking the match under Marissa's supervision. As they sat down to eat, their laughter echoed through the apartment that had witnessed so many tears. Lily told animated stories about her day at school, and Marissa shared funny moments from her classes, their voices mixing with the clinking of forks and the soft music playing from the radio. "To my Professor Mom." Lily raised her glass of milk in a toast. Marissa raised her own glass, her heart so full it could barely contain the joy. Here in their humble kitchen, with simple pasta and second-hand furniture, she felt richer than any success could make her. They had each other, they had their dreams, and now they had hope blooming like spring flowers after a long winter. The sound of their happiness filled every corner of their small home. Not just celebration of a victory, but the quiet triumph of hearts that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Mother and daughter, they had proven that love and determination could overcome any obstacle, that education truly lived in the heart, and that sometimes the greatest teachers were those who had learned to rise again after falling. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Marshall Hall's main lecture room, casting warm golden light across rows of eager faces. Marissa Carter stood at the polished wooden podium, her hands steady on its edges as she surveyed the packed auditorium. Her heart swelled at the sight of Lily in the front row, wearing her favorite blue dress and practically bouncing with excitement. The dean's introduction had just ended, and now all eyes were on her. Marissa took a deep breath, remembering Mr. Darnell's words from that morning. "Just speak from your heart, like you always do. Education," she began, her voice clear and strong, "is not just about what we learn from books." She gestured to the stack of research papers beside her. "It's about what life teaches us when we're brave enough to keep showing up, even when everything seems to be working against us." A gentle murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. In the front row, Lily nodded enthusiastically, clutching her notebook covered in sparkly stickers. "When I first came to this university," Marissa continued, her accent wrapped warmly around each word,
"I thought I had to prove something."
"I had degrees from overseas that didn't count here. I had years of experience that seemed invisible." She paused, meeting the sympathetic gazes of her former classmates. "But what I learned in these halls wasn't just about earning another degree. It was about rediscovering my worth." She clicked to the first slide, showing a photograph of a small classroom in her home country. "This is where my journey began, teaching children who walked miles just to attend school. They taught me that education is precious. It's not something to be hoarded or used as a weapon to diminish others." The next slide showed Lily at their kitchen table, both of them surrounded by textbooks. Several audience members smiled at the touching image. Being a single mother and a student meant studying after bedtime stories, writing papers during lunch breaks, and sometimes feeling like giving up. Her voice softened. "But my daughter never let me quit. She believed in me even when I stopped believing in myself." Lily's eyes shone with pride, her small hands clasped together in her lap. A few rows back, Jenny and Marcus, her loyal friends from that first difficult class, nodded encouragingly. "Global education isn't just about different teaching methods or cultural perspectives," Marissa explained, moving through her carefully prepared slides. "It's about understanding that knowledge comes in many forms. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most valuable lessons don't come from textbooks, but from overcoming obstacles, from standing up after being knocked down. She shared stories from her research, tales of immigrant scholars, of mothers returning to school, of people fighting for education against overwhelming odds. The audience leaned forward, completely engaged. Even the most seasoned professors were taking notes. There was a moment, Marissa admitted, her voice catching slightly, when I almost lost everything. When false accusations threatened to destroy what I'd worked so hard to build. She glanced at Lily, drawing strength from her daughter's unwavering support. But that experience taught me something crucial. Truth and perseverance are stronger than prejudice and fear. The room was silent, hanging on her every word. In the back, she spotted Mr. Darnell standing quietly by the door, his weathered face beaming with pride. Education should lift people up, not tear them down, she declared, her voice growing passionate. It should open doors, build bridges, and light the way for others. Every time we judge someone based on their accent, their circumstances, or their path to learning, we diminish the very purpose of education itself. She clicked to her final slide, a simple quote about hope and resilience. Today, as I stand here as both a student and a lecturer, I want to share one vital truth. Your worth isn't determined by the degrees on your wall or the obstacles in your path. It's measured by your determination to keep learning, growing, and helping others do the same. As she concluded her lecture, the silence held for a moment before erupting into thunderous applause. One by one, people rose to their feet. The sound filled the hall, echoing off the high ceiling. Jenny and Marcus were cheering. The dean was nodding approvingly, genuine respect in his eyes. But Marissa only had eyes for one person. Lily stood on her chair, clapping wildly, her face glowing with pure joy and pride. Their eyes met across the podium, and Marissa mouthed the words that meant everything. For you. Lily's smile grew even brighter, if that was possible. She bounced on her toes, still clapping with all her might, embodying all the hope and triumph that had brought them to this moment. In her daughter's shining eyes, Marissa saw their shared journey, every late night, every struggle, every small victory that had led them here. The standing ovation continued around them, but in that moment, mother and daughter shared something deeper than success. They shared the unshakable knowledge that together they could overcome anything. The evening painted the sky in soft strokes of pink and orange as Marissa and Lily settled onto their small front porch swing. The gentle creaking of the chains matched their slow, peaceful rhythm as they swayed back and forth. The cool breeze carried the sweet scent of Mrs. Henderson's flowering jasmine from next door, mixing with the earthy aroma of fresh-cut grass. Lily snuggled closer to her mother, her small hand finding Marissa's.
Mom, tell me again about your first day of class,
she said, her voice quiet but eager. The 9-year-old had heard the story many times, but she never tired of it. Marissa smiled, remembering how far they'd come. Well, I was so nervous that morning, she began, giving Lily's hand a gentle squeeze. Remember how you helped me pick out my outfit? The blue blouse. Lily chimed in, grinning. Because you said blue makes you feel brave. That's right, Marissa chuckled softly. And you made me that special good luck card with all the glitter that got everywhere. I still find glitter in my shoes sometimes. Lily giggled, wiggling her feet that dangled from the swing. The swing creaked gently as they rocked, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. Birds called their evening songs, and somewhere down the street, children's laughter floated on the breeze. You know what I remember most about that first day? Marissa asked, running her fingers through Lily's soft hair. It wasn't Professor Whitaker's cruel words, or how scared I felt. It was coming home to you, seeing your face light up when you asked about my day. Lily lifted her head, her eyes serious. Were you ever really going to quit, Mom? Marissa paused, considering the honest question. There was one night when I thought about it, she admitted, when everything felt too heavy, too impossible. She looked down at her daughter's concerned face. But then I remembered something very important. What was that? I remembered that you were watching. That everything I did, every time I got back up after falling down, I was teaching you something more valuable than anything you could learn in a classroom. The swing swayed quietly for a moment as Lily absorbed this. A cardinal landed on their front yard's bird feeder, its bright red feathers catching the golden light. "Mr. Darnell says you're the best teacher he's ever met," Lily said proudly. "Even better than the ones with fancy offices." Marissa laughed softly, remembering the kind janitor who had become such a dear friend. "Mr. Darnell is very generous with his praise. But you know what? He taught me something important too." "What did he teach you?" "That education isn't just about books and degrees." Marissa shifted slightly, turning to face her daughter. "Real education, the kind that matters most, is about understanding people. About having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across their small front yard. The evening air grew cooler, but neither of them moved to go inside. "Mom?" Lily's voice was thoughtful. "Remember when that mean lady in the grocery store made fun of your accent?" Marissa nodded, remembering the sting of that moment. "You didn't get mad," Lily continued. "You just smiled and helped her find the pasta she was looking for. That was education too, wasn't it?" Tears welled in Marissa's eyes at her daughter's perception. "Yes, sweetheart, that's exactly right." She took a deep breath, her heart swelling with love and pride. "You know, people might try to make you feel small sometimes. They might try to tell you what you can't do, or where you don't belong." Lily nodded solemnly, understanding beyond her years. "But here's the most important thing I've learned," Marissa said, placing her hand over her heart. "No one can take away your education, not when it lives here." Lily's eyes grew wide with understanding. She placed her own small hand over her heart, mirroring her mother's gesture. "That's where the real learning happens," Marissa continued softly. "In how we treat others, in how we face our fears, in how we keep going even when things get tough." The sunset had painted the clouds in brilliant shades of purple and gold now, a magnificent farewell to the day. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of their old oak tree, sending a shower of golden light dancing across their faces. Lily rested her head on her mother's shoulder, a contented smile on her face. "You're my professor, Mom," she whispered proudly. Marissa felt tears spring to her eyes again. But these were different from the ones she'd shed during those dark days of doubt and fear. These were tears of joy, of gratitude, of profound love for this remarkable little girl who had been her strength through it all. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching as the sun continued its descent. The porch swing kept its gentle rhythm, like a lullaby to their shared memories. Marissa held Lily close, feeling the steady beat of her daughter's heart against her side, matching the rhythm of their swaying. The air grew cooler as evening settled in, but neither moved to go inside just yet. This moment felt too precious to break. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling like distant dreams finally within reach. Marissa pressed a soft kiss to the top of Lily's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Her heart felt full to bursting with love and gratitude for this child who had been her constant source of strength and inspiration. A smile touched her lips as tears slipped quietly down her cheeks, catching the last rays of the setting Sunday. She held Lily closer, their hearts beating in perfect harmony as the day's light faded into gentle twilight, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of something new and beautiful. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Marissa Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.